Hi, this is Jeff Mann, and I'm going to produce two new videos for my video project where I analyze the golf instructional videos produced by the athletic motion golf instructors. And in the first episode, which is going to be episode 9, I'm going to critique two of their videos, which I regard as two of the worst videos that they've ever produced. And when I mean worst, I mean videos where their golf instructional opinions is not compatible with the golf swing biomechanics performed by professional golfers. And in episode 10, I'm going to produce what I perceive to be the AMG's instructor's best ever video. And in that one, I'm going to show you a video where Sean Webb demonstrates the golf swing, and he does an outstandingly good job of demonstrating all the principles that I believe professional golfers use during the golf swing. So I'm going to be producing these contrasting videos. Now, if you have never heard of athletic motion golf, I would highly recommend you go to their YouTube channel and watch the videos. They have produced hundreds of videos, and from a visual perspective, I believe that they have no peer. They produce the most beautiful videos in terms of the visual content. I don't know if they've hired one or more than one videographer and graphic artist, but their videos are so wonderful to look at. I always look forward to looking at them because they use all kinds of special effects which just enhances what they're trying to get across in their videos. Now, I watch many online golf instructional videos by other golf instructors. And of course, every golf instructor, whether it's Milo Lyons or Danny Maud or others, they all sort of believe that they are the best golf instructors, obviously. And that's fair, because if you don't believe in what you're teaching, why would you go to the trouble of producing a golf instructional YouTube channel? Now, the AMG instructors perceive that they do a better job than all these other golf instructors, and their main argument is that they base their golf instructional videos on measurements. In other words, they say that other golf instructions have opinions and they will describe how you should perform a golf swing, but they believe they do a better job because they measure what professional golfers are actually doing. And the way they often do that is they use the gears system, for example, and then they'll present a video where they'll show what a professional golfer is doing compared to an amateur golfer using the gear system, which can depict the body motions and arm motions and so on. And they often produce highly instructive videos using this technique. And my favorite video that they ever produced related to spinal motion in the downswing. And they produced this really great video where they showed how the spine moves in terms of left lateral bend and right lateral bend during the downswing. And I regard that as the most instructive video that I've ever watched. Now, although they produce many videos showing what professional golfers do, and where I tend to agree with what they teach in, there are a number where I disagree very highly, and I believe they either misunderstand or misrepresent what is happening in a professional golf swing. So to start this two video project, episode 9 and episode 10, I'm going to start off with what I perceive to be two of the worst videos that the AMG instructors have produced. And the first one is this one that you can see on the screen, called this drill will improve any player's swing plane. And I've provided a link to this video in the info section under my video. And if that link doesn't work, then you just need to, you can watch my mouse, just copy this title here and put it into YouTube search engine, and you should be able to find this video. Now, I'm going to be critiquing this video, and I would highly recommend, before you listen to my critique, that you watch the video independently yourself. Watch the entire video so that you can make an independent judgment whether you are sympathetic to the AMG instructor's point of view or not. And that'll better prepare you for my critical analysis. So let's start off by analyzing this video. So this is the next image I'm presenting. And what we have in this image here, in image 1, is Mike Renato expounding a point of view that he calls the elbow pointer concept. So if you watch what he's doing here, he's holding the golf club in his lead arm, and he's taken his trail arm and he's just holding his upper arm with his trail hand. And he's got his thumb pointing upwards, and the position of thumb is more or less to point in line with the longitudinal axis of the lead upper arm. And if the club, here you see this club in this position here, was in line with his thumb, so that the club's in line with his forearm, but most importantly, if it's in line with his upper arm, that represents the start of the green zone. And Mike Renato says that in a professional golfer's swing, the club must only move in this direction, represented by this green one. And this red zone here, he believes a golf club should never move in that direction into what he calls the red zone. He says if you perform a downswing action and you allow the club to enter the red zone rather than being continuously in the green zone, he says that's a non-recoverable situation, and you'll never be able to perform a golf swing like a professional golfer if you allow your club to move into the red zone. Now, this image here, number 2, if you look what they've done is that here is Sean Webb roughly at the P5.5 position. And from P5.5, the club is going to start to release. And obviously, if this was your left arm here, and the club releases in the late downswing after P5.5, the club's going to move across your hands and enter this zone here between P5.5 and P7. And Mike Renato says that what you have to do in this period of the downswing is one has to allow the club shaft to steepen in this zone, so you can see it like it's tipping over in this direction like that. So this zone is where the club moves, say, from P5.5 or P5.8 to P6.2. That's the zone where Mike Renato and Sean Webb say the club must steepen a bit so it can tip over. And I'm going to argue that all these opinions expressed here are totally wrong. So let me go on to the next image. So here's an image of Sergio Garcia. So when Mike Renato said that as you start the downswing, you have to ensure that the club shaft stays in the green zone and never goes into the red zone, he uses as his reference point the midline of the lead upper arm. Now, if you look at Sergio Garcia here at the P4 position, you could picture that his club shaft is in line with his lead forearm, but also the lead upper arm. From this angle, we can't see the midline of the left upper arm, but it's reasonable to presume that he's adducted his arm across his upper chest, and when it's adducted, it's also internally rotated. And I would agree with Mark Renato that in this position, the club shaft is in line with his lead upper arm. And then what Mark Renato says, during the downswing, the green zone would be in this direction here, look at here, while the red zone would be in the under direction. And Mark Renato says that even Sergio Garcia, who is well known to shallow his club shaft in the early downswing, Mark Renato says he never enters the red zone. So let's look at image 2. So he's starting the downswing. This is probably the P4.5 position. And you could see the club shaft is starting to shallow out a little bit. If you look at the back of his lead hand, it's more horizontal relative to the ground. And at this point, I would suspect that his lead upper arm is still internally rotated while it remains adducted against his chest wall. However, let's see what happens between this position, which says P4.5, and this image 3, which is at P5.5. So what I believe that happens routinely in professional golfers who use a club shaft shallowing maneuver is that they will start to externally rotate their lead upper arm. So I've drawn a blue line here representing the lead upper arm. So I've drawn this blue line down the middle of the upper arm. So what happens between P5 and P5.5 is as the lead upper arm moves away from the chest wall, as you can see here, it also starts to rotate counterclockwise, right? But if you look at the club shaft is more shallow here at P5.5, even though the lead upper arm is rotating counterclockwise. How's that biomechanically possible? The only way it's possible is that what Sergio Garcia is doing, and what I believe all professional golfers do who shallow the club shaft, is they rotate their lower forearm clockwise. So I've drawn a red line over the radial bone, and if you see this red line is rotated clockwise relative to the blue line. And if you rotate it clockwise, you can see how the back of the lead hand will be more horizontal relative to the ground, and therefore the club shaft is going to be more horizontal. So I believe that Sergio Garcia's club shaft is distinctly in the red zone. It has to be. I can't perceive how it could possibly move into the green zone during the early mid-downswing. I'm going to go to the next image. And this is an image of Scottie Scheffler's early downswing. So if you look at Scottie Scheffler here in image 1 at the P4 position, he has his lead arm much steeper than Sergio Garcia. And you can see here at P4.5, he's starting to shallow the club. P5, it's starting to shallow. But most of the shallowing in a professional golfer swing happens usually between P5 and P5.5. And you can see that as he shallows the club shaft, and I've drawn a blue line across the back of Scottie Scheffler's lead hand, and you can see that it's becoming more horizontal relative to the ground as he shallows the club shaft. Now I'm going to go to the next image. And here is an image of Scottie Scheffler at P5.5. And I've drawn a green line down the middle of his lead upper arm, and you can see he's doing exactly the same motion as Sergio Garcia. As his lead arm starts to separate away from his chest wall between P5 and P5.5, the lead upper arm rotates counterclockwise. But during that period, the club shaft is shallowing more between P5 and P5 for P5 and P5.5 as seen in this image. And the only way that's possible, I've drawn this yellow line over his lead lower forearm's radial bone, and you could see it's rotating clockwise relative to his lead upper arm. And that's what allows a professional golfer to shallow the club shaft even while the lead upper arm is rotating in the opposite direction, in a counterclockwise direction. And that means that Scottie Scheffler's club shaft is in the red zone. Now I'm going to go to the next image, and I'm going to share this image with you. So what I've drawn here is here's Sergio Garcia in image 3, and the blue line represents the middle of his lead upper arm. And if his club shaft was moving in this green zone direction, it would be situated somewhere there. But as you can see, his club shaft is deep within the red zone. And that, from my point of view, it has to happen. I can't conceive how you can shallow the club shaft without performing a lead forearm pronatory motion to shallow the club shaft. And here's Scottie Scheffler, and again, this green line represents his upper arm. If the club shaft was really in the green zone, you should expect to see the club shaft there, but in fact the club shaft is here in the red zone. And you can see that Scottie Scheffler doesn't shallow his club shaft as much as Sergio Garcia. The third image is an image of Sean Webb, which I took from the video. And you can see that Sean Webb is demonstrating the golf swing using a lead arm only golf swing action. And while he does that, he's holding his upper arm with his trail hand, and he's pointing his thumb up to represent the axis of his lead upper arm. And I've drawn a blue line over his thumb to show the axis. And you can see that his club shaft's deep within the red zone. It's not as shallow as that of Scottie Scheffler or Sergio Garcia, but it's definitely in the red zone and not in the green zone. And I can't perceive that it can happen any other way, because if you see this red line which I've drawn over his radial bone, he has to rotate his lead lower forearm clockwise during the P5 to P5.5 time period to shallow his club. I'm now going to go to the next image, and I'm going to now discuss the second point of view that the AMG instructors proposed during their video. And they said that as the golf downswing evolves, you're going to have to start to steepen your club shaft, and they believe that it happens at this point here. And here's you can see Sean Webb with his club shaft more or less at the P6 position, and then they drew this image here and said this is where his club shaft is going to be in the next image as he starts to release the club. And they say as this happens, as the club moves from behind your hands here to get in front of your hands, it steepens. And they call that a tipping over phenomenon. Now, I believe that this never happens in a professional golf swing, and I'm going to explain why. So I'm going to go to the next image, and I'm going to show you what's happening in Scottie Scheffler's golf swing action. So here is Scottie Scheffler in image 1 at address. The red line represents what's called the original shaft plane, also called the hand plane. The yellow line is drawn through his elbow, and that represents what's called the elbow plane. The blue line is called the turn shoulder plane, and it is drawn through the trail shoulder at the end backswing position. And by drawing these lines representing swing planes of varying steepness, it allows you to assess what a professional golfer is doing in terms of shallowing or steeping the club shaft. So let's look what happens in his downswing. So in image 2, we have Scottie Scheffler at his end backswing position, where his club shaft is marginally above the turn shoulder plane. As he starts the downswing, by the time he gets to P5 position, which is image 3, you can see his club shaft is shallowing down towards the elbow plane. By the time he gets to impact, it's just marginally below the elbow plane or on the elbow plane. So what happens between P5 and impact is Scottie Scheffler is continuing to shallow his club shaft. The club shaft never steepens. Now, when we talk of shallowing it, professional golfers vary in how much they shallow it. Some professional golfers will shallow their club shaft all the way down to this red plane, the original shaft plane, in the later downswing. And most professional golfers will reach their plane that they desire the club shaft to be on during the late downswing, roughly by about P5.5. And then from P5.5 to impact, they keep the club shaft on what's called the functional swing plane. And if you keep the club shaft on the functional swing plane between P5.5 and P7, then essentially the club shaft is not steepening or shallowing. In other words, you shallow it down to the functional swing plane between P4 and P5.5. And once you've reached your desirable functional swing plane, which in Scottie Scheffler's case is the elbow plane, you keep it on the elbow plane continuously between roughly P5.5 and P7. I'm going to go to the next image now, and I'm going to share this image with you. So here Scottie Scheffler is more or less, I would guess, P5.8, let's say. Here he is at P6.1, and there it's P6.5. So between, as I said, he's reached his functional swing plane roughly by P5.5. So between all these three images, Scottie Scheffler is starting to release the club, which means he's starting to uncock his lead wrist to allow the club shaft to release. And at the same time, Scottie Scheffler uses what I call the left forearm flying wedge technique combined with a geometrically flat left wrist. What he does as he releases the club, you'll notice that the club shaft here is in line with his lead lower forearm's radial bone. So the blue line, which represents his wrist, is what I call a geometrically flat left wrist. And you can see here, as he's released the club, so here it was maybe, I don't know, maybe between 90 and 120 degree angle between the lead arm and the club shaft. He's releasing the club, but the club shaft's still in line with his radial bone, and he still has a geometrically flat left wrist. Here he is at P6.5, the club is releasing even more, but the club shaft's still in line with his radial bone, and therefore his lead wrist is geometrically flat. Now, at every moment during this time period, his club shaft is on the functional swing plane, which means that it's not tipping over his lead hand. If you had to trace, if I had to produce, say, 50 images every few inches. You could follow his club shaft between P5.8 and P6.5, and you could picture the motion of his club shaft, and you can see it moves slightly under the hands. It has to. If it moved across the hand and tipped over, that would represent a club shaft steepening action, often called a tumbling action, where the club shaft tumbles over the plane in an off-plane manner. And that does not happen in professional golfers. So again, I'm just going to emphasize that I disagree with this whole concept of a club shaft steepening phenomenon happening in professional golfers during this time period of the downswing. I'm now going to go to the next image, and I'm going to share this tab. And now I'm going to discuss the second video. And the second video is called The Right Wrist Movements for Solid Contact on Every Shot. And again, I'm going to provide a link to this YouTube video produced by the AMG instructors. And if the link doesn't work, you just need to type in this title into Google search, the YouTube search engine here, and you should be able to watch the video. Now, I'm going to analyze this video, and I regard this as one of the worst videos that the AMG instructors have ever produced. And I'll explain why, but I would encourage you to think independently as a viewer. So watch this video first before you continue to watch my critique, so that you can see whether you agree or disagree with what they say. Because it's very important when I talk about what they're saying, you have to be, as a viewer, you have to be sure that I'm not misrepresenting what they're saying. So I'm now going to go to the next image. So here's an image from that video. And if you look at the first part of the video, they describe how the right wrist should move in the backswing. So they start at address, and they say from address, the right wrist should start to extend, so that when you get to the end backswing position, your right wrist will be markedly extended. And they use the common analogy that when you get to the end backswing position, it will be like a waiter holding a tray. And I don't dispute that analogy. In other words, I do agree that the right wrist is extended at the end backswing position. Now, when they talk about what you should do as you transition into the downswing, the AMG instructors say you must immediately ensure that your trail palm faces the ground. So you can see it says here, until you get to the ball, you want to have your palm facing down towards the ground. And you can see how Sean Webb is demonstrating a palm down position here. I've drawn this blue line to represent the middle of the antecubital fossa, and you can see that the red line, which I've drawn over his trail forearm's lower radial bone, is rotated counterclockwise relative to the blue line, which means that his forearm's pronated. And that has to be, because I don't know how else you could get to that position where the palm faces the ground without pronating your trail forearm. I'm now going to go to the next image, and I'll share this image with you. And again, these are three images from the video. Now, image number one shows the identical motion, where he has his trail palm at the P6 position facing the ground. In image two, he's doing the same thing, but now he's holding a club shaft where the club shaft is parallel to the ground, and he's demonstrating the orientation of the trail palm at that P6 position. And he says it should be facing the ground. It's on the top of the club handle like that. Another point they make in their video, why they believe that the trail palm must start to face the ground in the early mid downswing, is that they say it allows you to start closing the club face early, as you can see in image 3. So Sean Webb, and you need to watch the video, demonstrates this phenomenon where he says he starts to pronate his trail forearm in the early mid downswing, and you can see that causes, if you look at his palm, you have to get on top of the club handle, and that twists the club handle and closes the face. And they say this is a good idea, especially if you slice the ball. So they are promoting this in this video, a way of performing a golf swing action with the trail arm. I'll go to the next image. And this is an image again from the video where Sean Webb here says if you don't get your trail palm to face the ground, and if you do the opposite, where as you start the downswing, you adduct your trail upper arm towards your trail shirt seam area, towards the right side of your body, and if you then supinate your trail forearm, you'll get into a position like this where the trail palm will be under the club handle. And from the AMG instructor's point of view, they say if you get into that position, it's disastrous, because they say if you're getting to this position where the trail palm is under the club handle, partially behind the club handle, then the only way you're going to be able to square the club face is to perform this motion that you can see in image 2, where you can see you have to actively pronate your trail forearm to square the face. Now, I completely disagree with everything they're saying in this video, because I don't believe that the trail forearm's motion is used to control the club face, and I will describe in the next image what's really happening. So I'm going to share this tab with you, and this tab shows Scottie Scheffler's early mid downswing. So I've drawn a red line over the back of his lead hand, and I've drawn a yellow line representing the orientation of his trail palm. So you can see the knuckles of his grip. Now, Scottie Scheffler uses a weak lead hand grip and a weak trail hand grip, which means that his palms are facing each other across the club handle at every moment during his downswing. So, as I mentioned to you, Scottie Scheffler shallows the club shaft. You can see by the time he gets to the P5.5 position, the red line is much more horizontal than it was at here, P5.4, and in image 2 at P5. And that requires a lead forearm pronatory motion. Now, to allow his trail palm to remain continuously parallel to his lead palm and parallel to the club shaft on the swing plane, he has to therefore shallow this yellow line. The yellow line has to become more horizontal. And the only way that's biomechanically possible is he performs a trail forearm supinatory motion, as you can see here. So when he gets to the P6 position, his trail forearm is supinated, markedly supinated. In other words, what he's doing is what Sean Webb demonstrated as a terrible position, because he said that the club shaft would be too open. But if you look at the club face would be too open. But if you look at the club face, yeah, it's what you would expect for someone who has a weak grip, lead hand grip. So if you look at the club face in P5.5, it's wide open and it's parallel to the red line, which is the back of his lead hand or lead wrist. It also represents the watch face area of your lead lower forearm. And you can see it's wide open there, slightly less wide open at this point. And that's expected, that's normal. You can see that Scottie Scheffler is doing nothing in the early downswing to close the club face in the manner that Sean Webb demonstrated, where the trail palm would face the ground. You can see that he's doing the opposite. He's supinating his trail forearm so that the trail palm remains partially under the club handle, and here it's partially under the club handle and partially behind the club handle. I'll now go to the next image. And this is just a close-up of Scottie Scheffler at the P5.5 position. And you can see I've drawn a red line representing his club, and if you drew an imaginary line extended out from the butt end of the club, it would point at a point on the ground labeled X. And that point X is on the ball target line, which means that as he shallows his club shaft is on plane still. Notice that the yellow line representing his club face is still parallel to the blue line, which is the back of his lead wrist. And his club face is open, and that's normal. Notice that his forearm is markedly supinated at the P5.5 position. Let's go to the next image. And this will be the final image. And here is Scottie Scheffler at P6. Here, image 2 is at P6.5, and image 3 is at P7. So what you can see, I've drawn a red line over his trail forearm's lower radial bone. The blue line is drawn through the middle of his trail antecubital fossa in the middle of his trail upper arm. And you can see the red line is rotated clockwise relative to the blue line, and he's markedly supinated there. The other thing, if you notice at P6.5, his trail forearm is markedly supinated, roughly to the same degree as it was here. And at impact, you can see he's still supinated. In other words, even though he has a supinated arm, he has no problem squaring the club face. This is the antithesis of what Sean Webb was trying to demonstrate. Sean Webb said that you have to get the trail palm facing down and keep it facing the ground all the way to impact. But that's not happening in a professional golf swing. If you look at his trail palm in P6, it's facing the sky to a large degree. In image P6.5, it's partially facing the sky, which means it's under the club handle, and partially behind the club handle. And at impact, it's behind the club handle. But at no time during his downswing does Scottie Scheffler have his trail palm facing the ground. Now, Scottie Scheffler, because he uses a weak lead hand grip, he has to use what is in TGM terms is called a power accumulator number 3 release action, which is biomechanically due to lead forearm supination. So if you look at image 2, the club face is still open relative to his club head arc, club head path. And the club face at this point is parallel to the back of his lead hand and the watch face area of his lead lower forearm. To get a square club face by impact, Scottie Scheffler performs a lead forearm supinatory motion. So at the back of his hand, the logo, glove logo, rotates counterclockwise. And that's how professional golfers square the club face relative to their club head arc in the late downswing. And the amount of lead forearm supination required is dependent on your lead hand grip strength. So if you use a weak or neutral lead hand grip, you're going to rotate it counterclockwise to a much greater degree than if you use a moderately strong lead hand grip. But the trail palm, which is, you can see, rotating in a counterclockwise direction, it's not rotating counterclockwise due to a trail forearm pronatory motion. What happens between P6.5 as the club shaft rotates counterclockwise about its longitudinal axis, secondary to a lead forearm supinatory motion, the trail wrist starts to straighten, and as it straightens, it rolls counterclockwise, secondary to a trail wrist circumductory roll motion, which I believe is passive. So what I've demonstrated in this image is I've compared the teaching of the AMG instructors to that of what really happens in a professional golfer. Now I'm going to stop sharing images and go back to my webcam. And now I'm turning on my video. And I'm going to conclude this video presentation to emphasize a few points. So here I am in my spare bedroom, and I just got a small golf club. So let's go to the one point. If you look at Scottie Scheffler at his end backswing, let's say there, as he starts the downswing, he's shallowing the club. If you shallow the club, you have to do, while you adduct your arm like that, you have to get your palm to obviously shallow out, become more horizontal. And biomechanically, what professional golfers do as they adduct the trail arm towards the trail shirt seam is they supinate. They do not turn the palm in that direction. They turn it in this direction because that's the only biomechanical way to do it. So if Scottie Scheffler at the end backswing had his upper arm adducted, I'm not so flexible like Scottie Scheffler, so I can't quite demonstrate it. But imagine that your upper arm's adducted against your chest wall like this, and your humerus is internally rotated. As you start the downswing, it's still there. But as it evolves between P5 and P5.5, your upper arm actually rotates counterclockwise. But the club shaft to shallow in this direction means you have to pronate it while the upper arm's rotating in that counterclockwise direction to get the trail palm to become more horizontal relative to the ground. You have to pronate your lead lower forearm. And that means the club shaft's in the red zone. There's no way that I can perceive the club shaft moving in the green zone in the early downswing. The second point, let's say you're getting very close to this position where the club head is behind your hands, and now Scottie Scheffler, I'll stand further away. At this point, Scottie Scheffler is starting to release the club. And when you release the club releases in the plane of the left forearm flying wedge. In other words, if you look at Scottie Scheffler's club shaft at this position, it's in line with his radial bone, and he starts to release it. Now, as he releases it, it moves like this onto the functional swing plane, because he's reached his functional swing plane roughly at this point, and he needs to release the club on the functional swing plane. To do that, while he's uncocking his lead wrist, he has to supinate his lead lower forearm a small amount to keep it parallel to the functional swing plane. Like, see what I'm demonstrating? I'm releasing the club, and I'm making sure that the club moves on the functional swing plane. But watch the motion of my club. I'll do it slowly. between here and P6.5, stand further away. I'm trying to keep it on the functional swing plane. Notice that the club, because it's on the functional swing plane, it's neither steepening or shallowing because you've reached your desirable swing plane by P5.5, representing the functional swing plane that the club's going to move on between P5.5 and impact. Notice the motion. It goes across the hands, but like that. It never tips over and steepens. So this image here that the AMG instructors produced never happens in a professional golf swing. So the point I'm making is I believe that the two videos I've presented is a total misrepresentation of what happens in a professional golf swing. Now let me just go back to the motion of the right wrist. So Sean Webb said, you start at address, and when you get to the top of the swing, you look like a waiter holding a tray. And I agree with that. The right wrist, as you go up, starts to become more extended, and you end up in a position. And if your club shaft's on a swing plane, in other words, you don't get to parallel, you stop at slightly short of parallel where the club shaft points slightly left of the target, and where an imaginary line drawn from the butt end of the club points at the ball target line, you're on plane. So when we talk of the waiter holding it, it would look like this. It wouldn't look like that, because that would only happen if you get to a position where the club shaft's parallel to the ball target line, parallel to the ground. So it will be this position. Now what happens as you start the downswing? Notice what I'm doing. I'm trying to keep my trail palm parallel to the swing plane. So here's Scottie Scheffler, as I mentioned. He's changing swing planes. He's just above the turn shoulder plane at his end backswing. By the time his lead arm's parallel to the ground, he shallowed it towards the elbow plane. By the time he gets to here, he shallowed it to the elbow plane, and that represents his functional swing plane. If you think, what does the trail palm have to do? Excuse me. I'm going to take a sip of water while I get such a dry throat while I'm presenting these video presentations. So what does his trail palm have to do? As it's shallowing it, the two palms are facing each other across the grip. This is the motion, right? Like this. You've got to, while you adduct your arm, you've got to supinate your forearm by the amount necessary at every moment to keep the palms facing each other across the club handle where the club shaft is on your desirable swing plane. Now, in the video that on right wrist motions, Sean Webb did this. He said, when you start the downswing, you need to start turning your palm to the ground. And he used this analogy. He said it's doing a motion which he called, try say, stop, stop. And he's pointed his trail palm towards the down the line camera, right? Like that. As he starts to pronate, like that. But that makes no sense to me. Why would you ever imagine that a professional golfer would want to turn his palm in that direction? To do that, try this. Try and turn your palm there. You'll have to pronate your forearm to do that. But as I explained, no professional golfer does that. All professional golfers that I've ever examined do a motion that looks like that, like you're skipping stones. And in that motion, the trail forearm is supinating. Now, I actually have proof that this is happening. If you look at episode number 1, the first episode I produced in my video project, I produced a graph showing research evidence where John Sinclair used a 3D machine to measure the motion of the lead arm and the lead wrist and the trail forearm and the trail wrist during the downswing of 100 pro golfers. And in his research study, the majority was supinating the trail forearm during the downswing from P4 to P6. So when you get to this position, this is what you look like, right? I see all this. And yet, in the AMG video, they said if you get to here, this is disaster, because then you would have to pronate your arm like this to square the face. But if you look at all the graphs and you looked at all the images I did in pro golfers, they all did the same as Scottie Scheffler. They got here, it was supinated. The trail palm was facing the sky and partially behind the club handle. It depends on your strength of your grip and how much you shallow it. So the more you shallow it, the more it faces the sky at this position. If you don't shallow it as much, it'll look like that. But between here and impact, all professional golfers are supinating it like that, keeping it supinated. And according to the AMG instructors, they say, well, then you wouldn't be able to close the club face, because they imagine that the trail forearm has to do a pronatory motion. And this represents a huge gap in their knowledge of how the golf swing works from a biomechanical perspective. Because what happens in professional golf is they get to this position, let's show again, and the club has to release onto the functional swing plane. That's the big priority, like that. Then as the trail arm starts to straighten, it has to remain supinated so that it can allow the club shaft to stay on the functional swing plane. If during this straightening action you started to pronate it, look what would happen. It would tumble the club shaft in an over the plane manner. And of course, professional golfers don't do that. So the trail forearm has to remain supinated. It starts supinating in the early mid downswing between P4 and P6. And the amount that's required depends on how much you shallow the club shaft. Then in the late downswing, the trail palm will never face the ground. It's partially under the club handle here, and as you get closer to the impact, the trail palm will face the target if it's parallel, like Scottie Scheffler at impact. But this late change from being more under to being more behind the club handle like this is not due to a pronatory motion of the trail forearm. It is due to a wrist counterclockwise wrist circumductory roll motion. And this happens passively in Scottie Scheffler, because Scottie Scheffler uses a weak lead hand grip. He gets to this position at P6.5, and P6.5 he has to, as he continues to release the club, he supinates it so that he can square the face. So in this P6.5 to impact position, as his trail wrist straightens, it passively rolls counterclockwise in direct proportion to the amount that the lead palm is rotating counterclockwise. So I really believe, if you want to understand what's happening in professional golfers, you need to look at episode number 1 and episode number 2 of my video project, where I described in great detail how professional golfers supinate their trail forearm during the early mid downswing, keep it supinated all the way to impact. And in episode 2, when I drew pictures on my palm, I showed that the trail palm never faces the ground. So as you can see in this video, which is episode number 9, I'm highly critical of the golf instructional teaching of the AMG instructors as presented in these two videos. However, and this is the most important point, I'm not here primarily to criticize the AMG instructors or any instructors. And I'm going to show you in episode 10 a video which I think is the best video that the AMG instructors have ever presented, where Sean Webb demonstrates a golf swing. And in that video, I'm going to analyze in great detail what Sean Webb is doing during his downswing. And Sean Webb is a highly skilled golfer. I mean, I regard the quality of his personal golf swing as being a PGA Tour quality. He is a superb golfer. And in that presentation, I'm going to analyze in detail what he does at every moment during his downswing. And you will see that in that video, he does everything that I've described as it pertains to a professional golfer like Scottie Scheffler. In other words, in his own personal golf swing, he shallows it, so he gets into the red zone. Then he comes to this position, he's supinated. I'll show you he keeps his arm, trail forearm supinated all the way to impact. I'll demonstrate here that he never has his trail palm facing the ground. I'll demonstrate that when he gets to this position, as he starts to release the club, he never tips it over. He does the same as Scottie Scheffler. He reaches his functional swing plane here, and then he releases the club on the functional swing plane. And he does it wonderfully well. So before you critique me, let's say you're a great partisan and you really love the AMG instructors, before you criticize me, I would encourage you to watch the next video, which is episode 10, where I describe the same phenomenon, what happens in the downswing with the left arm and with the right arm, using Sean Webb as an example. And I'll show you that Sean Webb, who has a very high quality golf swing action, he's doing everything I claim in this video. So I'm going to conclude this video, and as I always often conclude my videos, I encourage people who think that my opinions are wrong-headed to express a criticism of me by writing a comment in the commentary section of this video. And I will take every serious and well-intentioned criticism seriously. Now, if someone can present an argument that my opinions are totally wrong-headed, causing me to admit I'm wrong and I have to revise my opinions, I will actually respond to that criticism and admit that I'm wrong. In other words, I'll eat humble pie, and I will produce another episode for my video project explaining why I received some serious criticism that forced me to revise my thinking about golf swing biomechanics. And I wouldn't hesitate to do that, because for me, this is just a hobby. I just have a passionate interest in trying to understand how professional golfers perform a golf swing action from a biomechanical perspective. And I'm happy to revise my opinions if I learn something new that causes me to understand what they're doing in a different manner. So yes, I encourage you to criticize me. However, if there are some partisan viewers out there who attack me in a frivolous manner and their comments have no intellectual content, I will immediately delete those comments. I'm interested in serious criticism. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm now going to stop the recording.